Good evening, Eugene. And Springfield, maybe? We're an inclusive bunch. Several years ago, my husband and I were with our daughter, and we were in a busy store. We were doing a little last-minute shopping, and we drifted away from each other, and each of us thought that our 4-year-old was with the other one. And then after a while, we kind of came back together and realized that she was missing. He didn't have her, I didn't have her. I started to sweep up the store. Josh went out into the crowded mall, and there was no sign of her. And it was terrifying. Well, eventually we discovered her. She was at the security desk, crying and eating a cookie. And a kind mall employee was helping to get us reunited. And chances are, if you are a parent of a kid old enough to walk, you probably had an experience like that. If you haven't, you probably will. And if your memory is long enough, you probably remember a time when you were a child and found yourself lost and separated from your loved ones. And that feeling of universal horror to every child and every decent parent is not something you soon forget. You find out in that moment how deep and how fierce your love really is. And exploiting that love has often been the work of powers that seek domination and control. This cruelty of separating children from their parents has been inflicted in our country's history against enslaved people and against Native Americans. It was employed, as we know, by the Nazis against Jews during the Holocaust, and it has now been unleashed upon people seeking asylum at our border and upon immigrants already living within our communities. You're likely here tonight because you've seen the reports of these horrors unfolding at our southern border and in detention centers, otherwise known as, all around our nation, as our government treats desperate asylum seekers with sociopathic cruelty. You've heard about children from infants, toddlers, up to teenagers being separated from their parents and traumatized in overcrowded holding pens with inadequate hygiene, medical care, or protections from sexual assault. You've heard of families being detained in for-profit detention centers, our tax dollars funding profit from human suffering. You've read and heard these stories of trauma that is causing permanent harm to vulnerable children and adults. And you've heard the day after tomorrow mass raids are planned on our immigrant communities in cities across this nation, inflicting terror and demonstrating an emboldened anti-immigrant movement with dire consequences for the people targeted and for the soul of this nation, comprised of immigrants. Now, I speak as a person not directly at risk from these actions. And I'm speaking especially to those of you who, like me, are not in fear of a knock on my door this Sunday. Rallies and demonstrations like this one are sometimes criticized for being more smoke than fire, for allowing us to feel like we're doing something, to momentarily assuage that vague sense of guilt or anxiety that we carry around, knowing that suffering is happening, but not yet having made real commitments to ending it. My friends, this is not about you or me or our feelings. We need to know that. This isn't about making ourselves feel better about ourselves. This is about humbly committing ourselves into the service of justice for others whose lives are hanging in the balance. We must listen, we must learn, and we must commit to act. Yes. In his book, To Bless the Space Between Us, In a Blessing for Citizenship, John O'Donohue poetically describes how good anger can devolve into anxiety. I've been noticing my own rising anxiety lately with every news cycle, every new report of unfolding atrocities. Maybe you've been noticing it too. That growing cloud of tension and fear that casts its long shadow over the whole of our lives. We're on edge more with each other. We're more critical. Our energy is turned inward. We have little daggers where we poke each other, even though we're on the same team. When anxiety rises up like this, it can paralyze us. It can wear us down. It can drive us to the relief of meaningless distraction. And it can lead us to despair. In this blessing, O'Donohue prays, and I quote, "that we may have courage to turn aside from it all and come to kneel down before the poor, to discover what we must do, how to turn anxiety back into anger." The antidote for anxiety is action. And while anxiety dilutes our energy, good anger focuses our energy. Good anger fuels right action. Good anger gets us off of our emotional couches and onto the streets of justice. Good anger invigorates our tired bodies and moves us to do what must be done, not to assuage our guilty feelings. Let us humbly join hands with our siblings and march forward until every single child is reunited with their parents. Until every innocent human being detained in this country is free. Until every family can sleep at night without fear of a knock on the door and the terror of a government gone awry. Some of you might have heard that I was asked to talk on Love Calls Us to Action. And you might be wondering why I've been talking so much about anger instead of love. My faith tradition, I'm a Methodist pastor. My faith tradition, rightly and appropriately practiced, understands the connection between love and anger. You see, God's anger is always rooted in and proportional to God's love. And God's anger is expressed most often when the poor, the immigrant, the child, the sick, the hungry, and the vulnerable of the earth are exploited and harmed by the powerful. In my tradition, when we are baptized, we take a vow to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they may present themselves. When we find that anger within ourselves that is rooted in love for suffering people, we are connecting with the anger and love of God who gives life to us all. We are connecting to the spiritual power of resistance to evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. We discover the power to bring God's dreams for all people into reality. This is my tradition. What we are up against is powerfully evil and unjust. Sentimentality will not cut it, friends, will it not? No. Anxious fretting will not get the job done, right? Right. We need love that dispels navel-gazing anxiety. We need love that will do right at all costs. Love that does not back down. Love that will not give in to despair or hopelessness. Love that will endure. Love that will fuel our resistance to injustice. Love that is strong enough to generate right anger. We need love that is fierce to take on this darkness and transform it with our light. In a little while tonight, we're going to light up our candles. And we're going to march together. And as we do, as we gather here tonight, as we sing, as we listen, as we learn, as we march, Let us together find that deep well of love within us, to look upon the evil, injustice, and oppression that is harming our human siblings, and let love and right anger empower us to action. History will ask what we did in this moment. Now is the time. We are the force that will reckon with this evil. Let's do this.